Good morning, everyone. My name is Timothée Ponchon, and welcome back on the EU Deal show. Today, we are welcoming Elise Barbey, presenting us today the topic of food policy after Brexit. Thank you, Elise, for joining us.
Thank you.
You have written in your work that the UK food system will be heavily impacted by Brexit. Indeed, about more than 10,000 containers of food come into the UK on a daily basis. And this leads us to believe that there will be a great adaptation that will be vital for the UK.
Yes, of course, as you just mentioned, the UK does not feed itself on its own. Food security is highly dependent on the EU's internal market. I just want to remind that food security is the fact to make sure and ensure that we have food on shelves in grocery stores. So the domestic production of the UK has been steadily dropping since the 80s, early 80s, and today the UK is only self-sufficient by 60%, which means that 30% is coming from the EU. So yes, there is a risk that we have food shortages, but we believe, and I personally believe, that the food is not a problem. The real main question is from where and who they're going to get the food from.
So is it possible that they find a trade agreement with someone else?
Of course. Actually, you have many different ideologies. You have nationalists who believe that the UK can increase its production to the extent that it may not need anybody. And you have also Atlanticists who believe in a UK-US trade deal, of course. But legally speaking, of course, the UK, since it is out of the EU, can trade with whoever it wants.
So you believe that we can expect a US-UK deal this year by the end of 2020 or 2021?
I think it is a bit more complicated than that. The US explained that a deal will only be concluded if the UK abandoned its food safety standards. I don't know if you've heard of Wilbur Ross. He's the current US Commerce Secretary of the government since 2017, and he said during the Confederation of the British Industry at London that any deal with the UK would be possible only if they again stop trading or respect food standards of the EU. So it implicitly means that, of course, the UK will have to choose between the EU and the US.
But do you think that the British citizens would agree to such a deal and situation?
Well, in fact, no. Data have shown that the large majority of the British public would rather keep the actual current food safety standards than lowering them in order to have a trade deal with the US. Actually, trading with the US shows kind of risks for the food safety of the UK. For instance, I don't know if you've heard of the Carbonated Chicken scandal.
Or maybe you can remind us what it was about.
Well, it's normal if you haven't heard of it, because it's been prohibited since 1997 in the EU. It is only done on vegetables, for instance. But the chlorinated washed chicken refers to poultry that has been treated with antimicrobial rinses in order to kill the bacteria. Now, the UK is being very reluctant to such processes and methods because, of course, they are not first agreed and allowed in the EU, and secondly, because they're not used to it, and we don't really know if it's safe enough. So you have many industries, like even the CEO of Tesco, Dave Lewis, who apparently said that he would not allow such chlorinated chicken to be sold in its shops. And I think abandoning EU food standards would be a mistake from the UK government.
So, of course, it's been said that the EU food standards and rules are one of the safest in the world. To what do we owe this success, to be honest, and recognition throughout the world?
Well, of course, yeah, the EU food policy is very safe, and this is why the food we eat every day is actually safe too. So even though each state has its horizontal legislation regarding the way they produce the food, when it comes to the internal market, we created the European Food Safety Authority, and which is with scientific opinions and advices, we make sure that the food is always safe. And you also have, for instance, the rapid alert system for food and feed, which is basically the procedure when you want to ring the bell when a certain food or a product is dangerous for consumption. And that was the case, for example, during the mad cow crisis. That's what we were using this. So yes, member states as well as third countries really have to cooperate and they have the obligation to respect this policy, of course, when they trade with the EU.
But as a whole, what will be the impact for the food safety in the UK after it has left the EU?
Well, the UK will be joining the third countries group. So, of course, it will be exposed to first stricter rules, safety rules, and also stricter labeling rules, and that's normal. But I don't think it's going to be a real big issue because, of course, the EU is already quite familiar with the UK authorities. So I guess it's not going to be that complicated to deal with them.
But has there been any information on negotiation or agreements between the UK and the EU that will be reached in the future?
Well, as you may know, the UK left officially the EU on the 31st of January 2020, but today we're still in transition period, which means that we're still following EU rules and we're still trading with the EU, which means getting the food from the EU. Jean-Claude Juncker did say that we should try to preserve the internal market in its entirety, but for now all we know is that the British government wishes to maybe have a free trade agreement, but we do not know much about the deal right now for food.
Well, is the fact that they have not concluded an agreement poses some form of uncertainty towards the UK or even a threat?
Well, no, I think the UK is being very precautious. Actually, it has been signing up agreements with different states, such as the states of Central America, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Tunisia, and many others. I think there are 20 states in total. And also, it is actually currently discussing for future agreements with, for example, Canada, Japan, and Mexico, and again, many others. So no, I think the UK is okay. It's safe for now.
So the main downside from Brexit would be a shortage in food and maybe the circulation that would be more easy of unsafe products?
Yes, but that's not all. Actually, there are many questions the House of Lords have asked to the government. Concerning the way the UK will get its food system functioning, of course, and concerning first the costs of all this changing will engage. Yes. Of course. So the government explains it wishes to negotiate a free trade agreement with the EU, and that's still a wish. But if that doesn't happen, we can expect a UK-EU deal under WTO rules, which means, of course, that it is going to be more restrictive and it's going to be more costly for the UK, for example, for beef, milk or wine, because they get a lot of products, as we said, from the EU.
So can we expect price changes depending on the trade agreement that they reach? That's what you're saying, if I correctly understand you?
Yes, well, depending on the trade agreement they reach, of course, you can expect a different result, but it is also highly dependent on the currency devaluation, but also on the way businesses, farmers and producers will adapt. You can't just evaluate every consequences just based on the trade agreement they will reach. But I think the one aspect we really not forget is that some people are really facing financial difficulties, and that for them it's going to be way more difficult. For example, Tesco, which is selling affordable quality food, maybe if it rises its prices, it's going to be very hard for families to be able to buy this food. So
the lower income will be the most impacted people throughout the British society?
Yes.
So did the government answer the concerns expressed in the 14th report that was about food safety after Brexit that was coming from the House of Lords?
Yes, indeed. The government gave an answer and tackled each question, whether it was on future agreements, self-sufficiency, new strategic imports. The government is being very positive. It also, of course, tackled the issue of future tariffs. So as I said, the government is positive. It's acting like everything is under control. A little too much, if you ask me, and if you ask a lot of scholars in Britain right now who think the same thing and think that a little bit more clarity is wished in the upcoming months, and also clarity on the deal that will be issued, because obviously that will have, as I said, a lot of impact on the food prices and everything else.
Well, thank you so much, Elise, for coming up today. And this concludes our today's emission about food safety. Thank you again for coming to us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much.